All right, let's keep moving on, and let's take a look at this week's college football playoff rankings. And I'll bring them up on the screen here. The first team out, Tennessee. Second team out, SMU. Your top 12 for this week: Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, Indiana, Notre Dame, Alabama, Miami, Ole Miss, Georgia, Boise State, and BYU. So as the bracket holds up, because again, projected conference champions, it would be number 1 Oregon, number 2 Texas, number 3 Miami, and number 4 Boise State would have the buys based on this week's rankings. BYU would be the conference champion in the playing in the first round. They would go to number 5 Ohio State. They would then number 8 seeded Notre Dame would host number 9 seeded Alabama. Number 8 seeded Penn State would host 11 seed Georgia, and number 7 seed Indiana would host number 10 Ole Miss. Now again, this will change by the time we're back here next week because Indiana plays Ohio State.
Right.
BYU plays Arizona State, so there's potential movement there. And obviously the potential of teams getting upset, as we've seen almost every week throughout this season. Let me start with this. Are we surprised that they put Boise State above the Big 12 champion? That
absolutely not.
Would be in the bye.
Absolutely not, because see, BYU doesn't have a quality loss like Boise State was. Sure, Boise State has not beaten a single G5 team, Power 5 or Power Conference team. But yeah, clearly hanging in with the alleged number 1 team is certainly qualification enough for you to surpass an actual football participant in the Power Conferences. So yeah, absolutely. Of course, I'm dripping with sarcasm, but yeah.
Anybody else?
I would just like to state for the record, and Jim can be my witness to this. I sent Jim my rankings and my college football playoff matchups. I smashed the matchups with the exception of Ohio State BYU because I had Colorado in that spot. I had everything else in the bracket the same as the college football playoffs.
I gotta check if BU did they play? They have not played Colorado yet, have they?
They have not.
No, they are in line to play them, assuming both teams do win out the next 2 games. They would play in the Big 12 title game.
Of course.
So that I went that route because
draw.
BYU getting just outworked on every side of the football by Kansas.
And that is a bad loss. Like, it's not, see, I could say Northern Illinois. I'm not trying to be an a-hole. It's not like it's not Georgia Tech bad, but it's pretty bad.
It's not Stanford bad.
It's not that's a great call. It's not should have lost to Wisconsin bad, but it's pretty goddamn bad.
I think as far as this list layout goes, obviously, like you said, it's going to get shaken up quite a bit. Obviously, the ramifications of like if an Indiana is out for some reason, and a Tennessee gets in, that's a whole lot of SEC. But I think the actual layout of this particular bracket is fun for me. I think if you're on Kyle's team and you're very anti the weak Penn States and Notre Dames or so you said,
and Indiana's,
this is a fun one for you, minus the Ole Miss. But I think Georgia's would be a terrible draw for Penn State, and I think Alabama's not a great draw for Notre Dame. I'm not saying that's not a winnable game, but I don't like it. And it would set up the hypothetical if BYU could pull off the impossible. The BYU Boise State second round would be pretty entertaining. So this would be fun. It's never going to happen, but yeah, I don't know if I have any major issues at this point, just because, like you said, I think there's teams in here that are in here just because if they win, then it looks like you were smart. And if they lose, you're like, well, we knew they were going to lose.
Can I pull the conspiracy theory card here real quick?
Sure.
You usually do.
I know. Well, in this segment, you could argue that, Sean. That's fair.
Yeah.
I feel
and
like they put BYU. Did you hear me arguing, you haters? I feel like you can make an argument for BYU on the strength of them being 9-1 and Georgia not. that you could put Georgia at 12. Tennessee being out is absolutely asinine. We don't have to talk about that right now. But I think they intentionally put BYU there below Georgia, not so much because they think Georgia is better, but they don't want to be in a position to have 2 upset games be in there, and they don't want to blow their wad on a Georgia-Ohio State game in the first round. I think TV had something to do with that part of the decision.
I think it always does.
I will say that I think it has to do with having to have a Big 12 team in the top 12. Because there's no other Big 12 team in there. I think that's why they're ahead of Tennessee. I don't think it has any. I think.
Oh yeah,
I think whoever 12 was going to be BYU or Colorado, and everybody else was going to be up because there's no other Big 12 team.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Well, yeah, they're bumped up because they're conference champions.
Yeah,
no, on that you are correct.
Yeah, so BYU, and I'll bring up the actual full rankings. BYU actually 14th in the rankings.
Is absolutely asinine. I don't get it.
How are they behind SMU?
I don't like that because that's a team they beat. So with the
same record
in and of themselves, I don't like. I think the problem with BYU is they've had a number of close losses to
Big 12 teams. Big 12 teams who are underrated, generally speaking.
Man, I don't know if I'm ready to buy in on underrated Big 12 teams. I don't think the Big 12 is as strong across the board as.
But what about the ACC, Jim? And that's the conversation with SMU, is it not?
Well, right, and I'm saying BYU should be above SMU. I'm not disputing that. I think the issue with BYU is they have had a number of close games with teams that are now not ranked, and now you have a loss to a 4-8 Kansas squad.
Oh no! If you're hitting me with the style points argument, you're 1,000,000,000% correct. Yeah. That's not what I'm arguing. What I'm saying is the reason why I make the statement I make about the Big 12 is I can make a pretty good argument that they're better than the ACC, and I can certainly make a better argument that they're better than the Mountain fucking West. So with both those things in mind, Boise State and SMU being ahead of them, kind of asinine.
I think style points plays a role. 6-point win at Baylor, 1-point win at intrepid Utah,
3-point loss at Oregon. That's the only thing that matters, man.
No. I'm talking about BYU.
And I know you are. And listen, the style point question has been answered. Burn. You're arguing an argument that's already been agreed to. What I'm telling you is, how is that any better than beating San Diego State and some of these other powerhouses that are on Boise State's schedule, man? Here's the reason why I keep hitting this, guys. The whole reason we banged on the BSC, Joel Klatt, that's me saying, and rightly so. The whole reason we banged on that,
and rightly so,
is because teams with weak schedules could hide and get to the top. All these, are we at the decades point later? You're getting the same shit. It's teams hiding behind weak-ass schedules, man. It's terrible. And teams are going to see this, scheduling accordingly in the future, and I'm going to suffer either a loss of vocal cords or a fucking heart attack. So, you know.
Yeah, but your weak schedule thing is kind of like, I mean, you can say that Penn State has a weak schedule. It's like, well, they're playing a conference schedule. Like, there's only so much. I mean,
but then I get banged on for giving the SEC that compensation. That's, at least I'm consistent, Sean. That's my point.
Well, just look behind your top 12, right? I mean, obviously we have some issues with BYU. Obviously, no one seems to have any issues with SMU not being in, right? So, like, if you're talking like, and Tennessee's really only out because of the Power 5 rule, or so it would seem. So, like, you know, because BYU
for the conference,
right? Otherwise, Tennessee would be in, and unfortunately, that's where the dice are going to fall. There's only so many spots. But looking at 15 through 25, or maybe you have someone in mind beyond 25 that played a really hard schedule.
What I'm saying,
that list belongs in if someone you're talking about belongs out.
What I'm saying,
I'm looking at a team of middling college football teams, including Colorado, that, you know, is Texas A&M a good team? Yeah. Do I think that, you know, it's much like the NFL where it's like there's only a small percentage that I think are playing championship caliber football and everybody else is just clamoring for a shot.
I'll bottom line it this way. Okay, we cited SMU is okay at 9-1. Why does Penn State and Notre Dame both? Why are they okay at 9-1? Or even Miami? Shoot. I mean, granted, I think part of it's because Miami's projected to win the conference, but then they're at 8 because the committee's trying to not back themselves into a corner, right?
Well, your easy schedule for Notre Dame, just out of your easy schedule for Notre Dame, includes a win at 15 Texas A&M.
And
a game this week
four
against
G5 teams on it. Stop that with the Texas A&M. Nobody knows what Texas A&M is yet.
Well, right now, I'm looking at them at 15th in the country.
And I can make an argument that they don't belong. It's the same way Notre Dame lifted Cincinnati into the 4-game playoff.
You want. But my point
I think Notre Dame is also there because their loss came in week 2, and they've been clobbering almost everybody since,
including G5 teams. No, there's no dings here. Like, okay,
no.
Listen, we're away from the topic. 9-1 is penalized for SMU, but it's okay for Penn State and Notre Dame to do it. That's the problem.
But how is 9-1 Texas the number 3 team in the nation when they're out of conference is Colorado State, a trash Michigan team, San Antonio, and UL Monroe?
Because the SEC is that much better and people just refuse to acknowledge it.
Okay, but their SEC schedule is Mississippi State, Oklahoma, Georgia,
I don't understand your question then. By the way, who said that there was a problem with Texas at 3? I didn't say
I'm coming at if we're coming at 9-1 teams.
Kyle, in what world is anybody putting down the SEC?
Let's get back on track.
I'm looking at like half the conference in the top 25.
Yeah.
Like, nobody's putting that down. There's a reason why Georgia can have the losses they have and be at 8-2 and probably be where they are in the standings.
The out-of-conference argument is one that you can address if you'd like, but Texas obviously is getting love for the SEC, right? And if we're establishing that that's not a problem, then why is Texas being brought up? Great. Meanwhile, there is no out-of-conference point to be made with Notre Dame, by the way. Excuse me, what, Mike? Are you doing your EJ impression? Like, what are we doing here?
No, you asked a question. I was answering it rather than just letting you just keep on talking.
Okay, then what is your answer? Like,
the answer is if you're talking about a Penn State team 9-1 that played a shit out of conference schedule, call Texas out for playing a shit out of conference schedule.
But their in conference schedule blows too, Mike. That's the thing. At least at some point, Texas has beaten somebody who was number 1 in the fucking country.
Okay, and they also beat Michigan, who's going to finish with a record under 500.
But also, what does that have to do with anything?
Shit out of conference schedule. At least acknowledge that they didn't play anybody out of conference, Kyle.
That's fine.
How is it Penn State? How is it Penn State or Alabama or Miami or Boise State or BYU or Clemson's fault? How the rest of their conference isn't good?
It's not about it being their fault. It's about people not rewarding for playing in a conference that's good, which they're doing with Texas. Cool. Meanwhile, if you lose 2 games in a harder conference, you're penalized for it, which means outright the SEC's penalized.
What SEC team is being penalized?
Hold on.
No, Sean, you don't get to do that right now. You don't get to argue that while Mike argues the other thing. If you don't like me saying this, then you need to stop Mike with his out-of-conference bullshit because you're never going to get a good out-of-conference schedule by an SEC team so long as they get penalized for their conference losses and other teams don't.
Do you want the answer as to why teams with 2 losses in the SEC are being punished?
Well, no, I got to answer Mike's question, and then everybody else has questions for something
I think you already answered Mike's question.
You don't have to answer my question.
Texas has a bad out-of-conference schedule, and Mike, if you didn't hear him say it, he said it 3 times. He admitted that the out-of-conference schedule is not an issue. Yes, it's terrible. He said that 3 times.
But stop penalizing other teams.
Okay,
hold on. They're rewarding the SEC.
I'm done.
The fuck on. Alabama has lost to Vanderbilt,
who was ranked at one point.
Do we want to end the show?
I mean, if you like.
Do we want to end the show?
I can just leave.
Goddamn answer.
What you want. It's cool.
Apparently it's not, Kyle. You asked for an answer. I'm trying to give an answer.
No, wait, hold on, Jim. Honestly, I was told to defend something by Mike. I'm doing that. I don't remember. Like, I got to 9. I said to 9-1 teams. Now we're talking about Texas, something I didn't even bring up.
A 9-1 team.
Okay, cool.
I'm not even talking about Texas. I'm talking about the 2-loss SEC teams that are behind Notre Dame. Because again, Notre Dame is apparently an issue. So I'm trying to address some things. Am I capable of doing that?
We're about to find out.
So Alabama has lost to Vanderbilt. Ole Miss has lost to Kentucky and LSU, who are both unranked. Georgia has the 2 best losses. Okay, if you want to make a case that Georgia should be higher than 10, cool. I'll listen to it because they've also beaten the team that's at number 3. So if there's an issue with any of these SEC teams where they are, the answer is Georgia at 10. That's the answer. Georgia at 10 is the biggest problem.
As long as they're in, Georgia doesn't care.
Tennessee has a loss to Arkansas. So, like, there's out of those 2 losses, yes, while one of them for every team but Georgia is to a team that is at least good, okay? They also have losses to teams that are bad. So, regardless of strength of in-conference schedule, if you lose to a bad team and you lose another time, you have to get punished for it. You do. Also, and like, there are bad out-of-conference games in the SEC. There's bad out-of-conference games in every schedule. Alabama beat up on Mercer this weekend. Like,
here's the problem that none of you will address, and it means worse college football for everybody. What you've said in all of this is you get rewarded for being in a weaker conference. If you go out and you have a bad game within your conference and it happens to be against a team that's down, I get it. You should be dinged a little harder, but maybe incentivize teams to schedule better football games for us who have to watch these sons of bitches, instead of rewarding teams for hiding in their conference. Because here's what I know. The better out-of-conference schedule than a lot of these teams could be arguably had. Not in the case of Notre Dame. I get it. Texas A&M, blah, blah, blah. Fine. Am I supposed to be impressed by Penn State or Indiana?
I'm not asking you to be impressed by Penn State or Indiana.
And that's the root of all of this, okay? People are saying that
We've been saying Penn State's overranked all season.
And I question it, then I'm the asshole. What are we doing?
Like, the only reason they fell only a couple of spots and they're still where they are is because they kept it close with Ohio State. That's the unfortunate part of the situation.
So the quality loss parable.
Sure. Again, if you've been overranked all season,
like to agree.
if you're overranked all season, you're going to continue to be overranked throughout the year. But if those teams in the SEC, because again, if we go back to the projected matchups, if Georgia is actually, better than number 10, like we probably think they are, then they should have no problem going to Penn State and winning, and they should have no problem then playing Miami in the second round. Like, it's not ideal, right?
Thank you for admitting that.
But like, they on this board are going to have one of the easier roads, right? Because they're going to have two of the easier games on this board to get to the college football playoff semifinal.
And what's going to happen? We're going to win. Burns going to be all up in my shit. Oh, the SEC had such an easy road because the playoff committee got it friggin' wrong, man. Can
I conspiracy theory you for a second, Kyle? And
let me land the plane, and I'll hand it to you, buddy.
Okay.
You make the valid point that it'll correct itself in the playoff. I would contend, Jim, that the whole purpose of this thing is to handle that before. That's where I'm at. And if I'm wrong, cool. But yeah, go ahead, Sean.
Well, it's a semi-conspiracy theory, and it kind of supports what you're saying, but it may also offer some explanation. Is like, why are these SEC teams below so-and-so and this and that? Maybe it's as a way to reward them for playing in the SEC. And that is to get them in as a lower seed You have these teams that you feel it's not that maybe it's not that they're buying that Penn State is that much better. But if they seed them in the right order, it sets up these 2-loss SEC teams to play a 1-loss SEC team later. Like, this may have more to do with the road than the destination, right? So the bottom line, like, you knew going in, Notre Dame could have not played A&M. Notre Dame could have just had another weak game there. But if they went undefeated, maybe even with 1 loss, they're probably in the top 12. Because
keep in
they're
mind,
going to sell tickets.
I'm not trying to knock Notre Dame out of the playoff.
Right. Like, Notre Dame's playing their butt off. And the other thing to remember is a lot of these, especially Notre Dame being all essentially out of conference, is these games are scheduled miles in advance. So you don't know who's going to be good or bad necessarily.
And Notre Dame does have, and I know it's Kyle's probably most hated conference, but they do have the deal because of their other sports with the ACC. So they play 5 ACC games.
Correct.
That go on a rotation. Like, there was a couple of years ago. There was a couple of years ago where they played Clemson when they were good, Miami that one time they were good, and Florida State when they were actually still good.
They all rolled through at the same time. I remember.
Right, like they all came through in the same season. Like this year, for Notre Dame, fortunately or unfortunately, depending what side of the argument you're on, they have Louisville, they had Georgia Tech, they had Florida State, Virginia, and Stanford now in the ACC. Those are your 5. Now, Stanford is also a team that they play every year. USC, a team they play every year. Navy, a team that they play every year. Navy, if people don't realize, it was the reason Notre Dame has a football program still to this day is because of the Naval Academy. That's why that rivalry continues. So there's games that are always built in to Notre Dame's schedule. Now, Army is a team they have played 50. I think this Saturday will be the 53rd meeting.
I didn't realize it was that many. Wow, that's
in history. They have played each other again because Notre Dame back in the day, they kind of revolutionized college football in a way and started playing coast to coast, whoever would pick up and play them, and they played Army a lot. So it is a rivalry that goes back into the 1800s. So now, then you look at some of those other games. Yeah, so you have Northern Illinois, the bad loss. You have Miami of Ohio. Well, guess what? And again, just looking at some other teams, there's Chattanooga's on schedules. There's Kent State's on schedules. There's
Citadel.
Mercer's on schedules. So scheduling some G5 schools is not something that other teams don't do. Then you look at some just kind of wrapping up the last couple other games, they added Purdue back. That is a rivalry team that they have played an in-state rival over time. Like, it's not Notre Dame's fault. Purdue stinks. Not Notre Dame's fault that Florida State, the floor fell out. That Lincoln Riley.
Yeah, that was probably supposed to be
that should have been a better game. Yeah,
that was a schedule builder game. That was one to help.
It's not Notre Dame's fault that Lincoln Riley can't coach himself out of a paper bag either.
So first of all, I am laughing very hard at your Lincoln Riley jokes. I have to leave with that.
Like, there are games that have not only been built into this schedule always, but that have been built in, because of the ACC rotation that just happen to be bad games. So, that's not Notre Dame's fault. The thing that Notre Dame can control is the margin of victory, which outside of a small number of games, Notre Dame's blowing teams out. That's all they can do
right now. They're rolling.
That's all they can do.
I acknowledge that they have been eventually blowing G5 teams out. And I'm not going to bring up Northern Illinois because then that'll be seen as a cheap shot and all that. I'm not trying to do that. And we're talking about other teams' scheduled G5s. Not every Power 5 has 4 of them. I think that's worth mentioning. The one thing I would push back on what they can and can't control is if they were really caring about changing that conference and that narrative, which they clearly aren't. They could have joined the Big Ten in the middle of all this kerfluffle, got a shit ton of money from not just in NBC, but the entire, I forget the details of the deal with the Big Ten, so forgive me for that. But NBC
there's a backstory behind that, where at one point, it was like late 80s, some early 80s, I don't remember, where Notre Dame was looking to join one. It was like they asked the Big Ten, and the Big Ten was like, "We're only 10 teams. Like, back off, buddy." Like, there was a point where Notre Dame wanted in. Big Ten said no. And then later, I remember it came up because there was a point when the Big Ten was expanding. They were like, please, Notre Dame, come join us. And Notre Dame basically told them to F off. So, like, it was a back and forth. So I'd have to look up the dates on that. But I remember that coming up when I was like, why did Notre Dame say no to the Big Ten? And it had something to do with a point where they were looking to potentially join a conference and were told no. So I'll do some research while we talk. But
what I'm saying is something that happened this decade is in the middle of all these movements with it, and I think it was 2 years ago that the newest Big Ten deal was signed. It was done with provisions to add Notre Dame. They were actively recruiting Notre Dame, and Notre Dame said no. So I don't want to hear this they can't control, because this was one of the very unique cases where they could have. So
they could have, but Notre Dame, because of the structure of their university and how not only athletic but also academic programs are funded through the football program, them staying independent is actually more financially beneficial to the university than a conference share.
You're going to tell me they couldn't broker a deal? I don't know. And by the way, we keep hearing about rivalries. Guys, how many rivalries have been killed in this latest version of restructuring regarding college football? You have that choice to stick to the rivalry or to improve your schedule. Notre Dame is, again, opting to hide. Now, I'll grant you, if they made those changes now, it wouldn't be for at least, 4 years we would see some of it. I'm not that stupid, but...
Well, in 4 years, Notre Dame added a home and home against Texas for what that game that was finalized today. Just for what?
Okay. So I mean, it's nice that you could pull one example out of your rectum, but again, the point being made. Well, there's all these games.
Well, the last 2 years they played Ohio State. Again, it's not.
So if they have so little control, what the fuck are we doing here?
I mean, they
either have control or they don't, Jim. That's my point, right? And
if they scheduled Florida State a year after they were supposed to be in the top 4.
If you're going to send here, well, they scheduled Texas, what the hell does that have to do with this year, fellas? And I get it. They got shafted by USC being this bad this year. I thought they would be better too. I like that you're making fun of Lincoln Riley. Rightly so.
To be fair, you keep saying that we keep hiding behind a schedule or hiding in a conference. So Jim's point is that we're not continuing to. This year we're caught between a couple home and homes, or this wasn't part of a pair of games. But Notre Dame consistently over the last decade has found those, especially once it was conference rivalry. It was like, well, you don't play a conference title game. I think that's where this deal to play Ohio State for 2 years came from, and that's where this deal to play Texas for 2 years comes from.
So they had to be forced into.
And they also did have the deal.
That is not true. Notre Dame has consistently, and the ACC deal actually has hurt them some. But it helps all of their other sports. And Notre Dame is not just a football school. Notre Dame is a powerful school in a lot of sports. Hold on. And so they joined the ACC.
I don't think he's saying that, Kyle. So
yeah, okay, just to be
let
clear.
Me finish. They joined the ACC in every conference but football.
Right.
And were allowed to continue as an independent. And then when it came time to renew, the ACC wanted them to join as a partial member, essentially. And Notre Dame really, they didn't want to because there were some rivalry games. Like the Boston colleges and like some of the ones that we like to sprinkle in every 2 out of every 3 years or whatever we did, that we couldn't do anymore. And so we don't play Michigan State every year. We don't play Michigan every year. And you don't get to now because you have these games locked in. So now we're trying to find creative ways to kind of sprinkle those games in, and A&M was one of them. Virginia Tech a few years ago playing in Blacksburg, like there was a chance we threw them in the schedule. It's hard to predict 4 and 5 years out what some of those teams are going to look like. But I think scheduling Texas in a few years, that's going to be a very good team.
Yeah.
And whenever you schedule Ohio State, that's going to be a good product. Maybe not a great product, depending what year you get them, but it's going to be a good product.
I keep getting Ohio State. Hold on. I keep getting Ohio State thrown in my face. Last year, I said Notre Dame had a good schedule several times on this very show, Jim. So...
I did want to point out the research. I like the choice by Notre Dame to not join the Big Ten only because it's a level of spite that's held on for like 100 years. That they tried to join twice the Big Ten. Once in 1899, they applied to join the Big Ten along with Indiana and Iowa, but they were not invited to the meeting. where the charter members were gathered. And in 1926, they were interested again, but Michigan reportedly worked against their membership. So maybe that's the dawn of the Michigan rivalry or part of it. But whatever the case, when they came crawling and like, hey, Notre Dame, it really helped rate it, we're like, no, you know what? It's fine. And they realized that they do have a perfect situation for where the BCS is, and they do have a perfect situation to get into playoffs, and they don't need you to boost their TV ratings because they play on TV every week. So, yes, Notre Dame does have an edge in certain areas. I disagree some in hiding in a schedule, but I'm not going to go farther into it because time-wise,
well, and
really
I did a little research as well. Kyle is right that none of the SEC teams in the top 11 have 4 G5 schools. I will point out that 4 out of the 5 have either 3 G5 schools or 2 G5 and 1 FCS. So there is that. There is not 4 of them. That is factually correct.
We've talked about them having bad out of conference schedules. Cool, man. I get it.
Yeah.
Okay. I just was pointing out the factual there. Last question I have before we move to the picks for the week. And it is one of the games that we will pick. Is the Indiana team that currently sits in the 7-10 spot with Ole Miss. They play at Ohio State this weekend. We know Indiana's 10-0. We know that they're scheduled to this point. I believe on the ESPN show tonight, it is ranked 103rd in terms of strength of schedule up to this point. Now, so them sitting at number 5. The question is this. Ohio State, spoiler alert for the pick'em, a 13-point favorite. Can Indiana survive a loss at all? Because with a loss here, they would need either Oregon to lose one or Ohio State to lose again with 1 week to go to get into the Big Ten title game. Can Indiana survive a loss and stay in the field of 12 next week?
I'd like to start, and then I can shut up. Okay. The answer is, the short answer is no. I don't think Indiana can survive a loss. I don't think. I think they need this, and I think it's part of the reason they're here. It's kind of like me at the bottom of my top 10s, where I'm like, look, this team probably doesn't belong here, but I know they're about to play, and they're either going to play their way in or they're just going to fall right the hell back out. But I think. I was going to sprinkle it in, but it didn't feel like the right time. I think, Kyle, Indiana, your gripes with Indiana, I think they're at a good spot for your gripes because they're going to do one of two things. They're either going to flop, like pretty much this whole panel is probably going to assume they're going to do, but I could be wrong. They could flop and just fall out, and then you have a team like Tennessee or an SMU or whoever else the committee feels is right, just slip right into this top 12 discussion. Or they're going to vindicate themselves. That would be, obviously, the real question would be, when you say, can they survive any loss? I guess the ultimate question would be if it was like a slugfest. Like, if it's a low-scoring nonsense, I don't know that they survive. I think they're going to have to get some style points, even if it's losing in a shootout. I just still don't see if they lose that game. Even if it's close, I'm sticking to my guns. I think they fall out. It would be interesting. They would have an argument if they barely lost.
We now, granted, it was to a considerably worse opponent, but we saw BYU fall 9 spots this week with a loss. Because again, their resume not strong, stronger than Indiana, but not a strong resume.
Yeah, I think the rest of the resume is not good enough, and much to what Kyle was saying, there's some SEC teams behind them. There's some other teams, teams like Texas A&M, who we all agree is great. Thank you for nodding your head, Kyle. That was strictly sarcasm. I speak it too. But I think there's too many teams in the wings, and it's too late in the season to take that loss. There's no time to clamor back. I think Indiana's out if they lose, and more on that later.
All right. Kyle, Mike.
I'll let Mike have the floor on this first.
Go ahead, Mikey B.
No shot. They lose, they're done. Season over. Enjoy the Meineke Car Care Bowl.
Listen, you son of a bitch, that's a great game.
Blockbuster Bowl. Oh man, I have a footstool.
No, get him out of here. This is not the time to bring this motherfucker.
Wait, EJ, I didn't text you. This motherfucker texts me and says, "Let me know when you're close to tool time. I'll jump in then." We're not near there. Get out.
So
he's actually out.
He jumped on it.
I don't mean to be this guy, but I'm going to be accused of it anyway. Yes, they're still alive. What makes me think that? Please see Boise State. If it's close, much as the evil twin himself very astutely pointed out, they're going to keep them in, man. They got the quality loss.
You have to keep Boise State in because you have to take a group.
This isn't about Boise State. I'm using them as an example for Indiana.
But
you think it's the G5 thing that's saving them? Cool.
I mean,
where was Boise? Can you flip to the big list again?
I'm just saying you have to keep a G5 school in there. The only other
Boise would have been in. Okay.
G5 school is either Army, who plays Notre Dame this week, or Tulane, who is right behind them. Like, you have to keep one of them in there. That's all I'm saying.
Comparing You're right, Indiana but Boise's like naturally scheduled 12. That's not the answer. Yeah, they're naturally scheduled 12. They're boosted to 4, but they're naturally scheduled 12. That's why I have a leg to stand on here. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, they were voting.
You don't have to agree. Just tell me it makes sense.
Sure.
You don't like it. Well, I'm sorry, man. That's what I got.
I'm just saying you gotta take a G5 school. They have to be alive. Like, if SMU was in, then I feel like you would have a leg to stand on because SMU has now a not so great looking loss to BYU. That's all I'm saying.
Right, but they're in the playoff without
his point is they're voted in as one of the 12 best.
Yes, because they also lost a game the first week of the season and have not looked bad the rest of the way.
Was it 1 or 2? I know I'm hitting you with technicalities.
Even if it was,
it doesn't matter. Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
we've said on this show, losing a game in September doesn't feel like it's going to hurt as bad losing a game in December.
No argument at all.
This is the proof. Texas A&M losing to Notre Dame early. They have a shot if things break their way. If they beat Texas and play in the SEC title game, they may actually get in with 3 losses because they're the team that lost in the SEC title game.
Well, I think they wouldn't. Okay. I see, because they would beat Texas. That would vault them up a possible loss in the SEC. Gotcha. I was like,
that's what I'm saying.
The wires didn't click in my head.
A 4-loss Texas A&M team. No shit.
Yeah, they're done. I do. Here's the thing. I don't think Indiana is going to lose a close game. I think if Indiana is going to lose, it is going to be a blowout. I think if they win, it is going to be close. So I think if a blowout loss happens, they're done, and I don't think they can recover from that. So because with Kyle's point, I kind of agree. If it is a close loss, see Penn State, Indiana will still be alive. However, just because Indiana, their first thing that even resembles a test was Michigan. Okay. And I say that respectfully, given the house that I live in.
Homer.
But you know what I mean? But like the first thing that resembled a test, Indiana almost failed. Like, so I don't think it is going to be a close loss. But we'll talk about that here in a second.
More on that later.
We've made it all the way. Devin got his wish. He said, I'm glad Kyle hasn't dragged the Oregon Ducks through the mud this week because we didn't have time, Devin.
I technically did by calling the Big Ten bag, but listen, they're undefeated. I can't touch them for now. It is what it is.
For now, yes, for now. All right.